Hey folks, thought I would go live and respond to I got a lot of questions from people on centering prayer. So I compiled many questions that I've received, and I thought I would go live and answer some of the questions I've got. As I said, it's been a while, so it's nice to connect visibly to you folks, or for you to see me rather than just to see my posts. So if you catch the replay, terrific. You can add some more questions there, and I'll be happy to respond. If you're listening now, feel free to send me questions, and I will respond to them. So let me start with the first question. What is the difference between contemplative prayer and centering prayer? Are they the same thing? I see Kim Miller join. Thank you. So what is the difference between contemplative prayer and centering prayer? Are they the same thing? Some people will say they are the same thing, but I'm going to say they are not. Centering prayer is really a tool or a practice that we use that opens us up to contemplative prayer. And contemplative prayer really is sitting in the pure presence of God, beyond our thoughts, emotions, sensations. So again, I will say they are not the same thing. They are two different things. Centering prayer is one tool. There are many other tools, Christian meditation, the Jesus prayer, etc., can be used as a tool or practice that really open us up to contemplative prayer, which is the pure presence of God. It's as if you're looking at a beautiful scene and you're wordless as you're looking at the scene, then you've entered contemplative prayer. So what is centering prayer? Centering prayer actually was created about in the early 1970s by William Menninger, who actually discovered the process itself in the cloud of unknowing. And then he and a couple other Trappist monks, Thomas Keating, Basil Pennington, kind of refined centering prayer. And centering prayer really is 4 steps. Step 1, sit. Or if you have bad back or bad neck, some people can have to lie down during centering prayer, and that's quite okay as well. So step 1 is you sit. Step 2 is you introduce interiorly a sacred word. So the word could be Jesus or love or ocean. You introduce that word interiorly to yourself. We'll call it step 3. Whenever you begin to think thoughts, plan your day, think about an argument you had, you come back to your sacred word, and then you ever so gently let go of it. And then lastly, at the end of the time period, you sit in silence for a minute or two, and then resume with your day. So as simple as it is, centering prayer is not simple, but it's really sitting with God. Whenever any thoughts or emotions come up, using your sacred word, or some people use an image. I actually use an image of a Jesus icon. I picture it in my head, and I come back to that whenever I begin thinking thoughts or planning my day. I see Douglas Richard join. Thanks for joining us. Why do I practice centering prayer? Well, I've always enjoyed silence. I just didn't know what to do with the silence. I was kind of introduced to silence by Carl McColman. I've read a number of his books, and he talked a lot about silence, but I just didn't know what to do in the silence. And then I came across in late 2013 a book by Amos Smith called Healing the Divide, Recovering Christianity's Mystic Roots. And in his book, he had centering prayer as a practice. And I thought, wow, there's a practice I can now follow. So I began practicing centering prayer kind of faithfully since June of 2014. Hello, Ashley. I can see you just joined as well. So I began practicing centering prayer in June of 2014 as a way of sitting in silence. I had heard from reading Carl McColman that silence was very transforming and could transform you, and I wanted to learn more and see how it would transform me. When do I practice centering prayer? I've been asked. I practice twice a day. It's the first thing I do before I begin my day. So if it's a work day, it's at about 6 a.m. is really my first silent sit. And then I have, on weekends, it's whenever I get up on a Saturday or Sunday if I'm not working. But it's always the first thing I do before I begin my day. I found it's really the best way to start my day, the best way to prepare me for my day. I think of it as I'm sitting with God, and then I'm getting up and walking with God during the day. And then, as I mentioned, I do have a second sit. During the workday, it's usually right before lunch. What I'll usually do at work, I'll leave my desk and I'll go to my car and I'll sit in the driver's seat of my car and do my second centering prayer sit in the driver's seat. Even in the winter, I'll do it there. I'll just kind of turn the engine on, get the car warmed up a bit, and then turn it off, and then do my second silent sit in my car. So those are the two places I generally do my sits, quite frankly, except on the weekends, obviously. My second sit is in my house, in our spare bedroom, along with where I'm actually doing my first sit. How long do I center? I see Geraldine Law joined. Thanks for joining. So how long do I center? I usually center for 20 minutes, as much as possible. I find that I need that amount of time to sort of reset and recharge me, reground me, reconnect me to God. So as much as possible, both of my centering prayer sits are 20 minutes each. I've been asked, is it difficult to find time for a second sit? Why is a second sit so important? I guess for me, it's not difficult to find the time. I make the time. Obviously, the first sit is the first thing I do in the morning, and I try, as much as possible, try to do that each day. And then my second sit, as I mentioned during the work week, is right before lunch, generally right before 1 o'clock in the afternoon is my second sit in my car. And then on the weekends, it's usually anywhere in the afternoon at home. And why is the second sit so important? You're running on fumes. You need to refill the reservoir. You need to reconnect with life. You need a second sit, quite frankly. And I know many people, it might be difficult to do a second sit in the early afternoon with their work schedule, and I understand. So a lot of times it has to be later in the day or later in the evening. So the only thing I'll be cautious of is I wouldn't do it too late in the day so that you fall asleep, quite frankly. But as much as possible, I recommend an early afternoon sit. It resets and recharges you. I found at work, if I'm stuck on a task or if I'm tired or I just seem to be running on fumes, the second sit kind of refills the reservoir, so to speak. And I'm always amazed at how productive I am the second half of the day. So really, as much as possible, I strongly recommend a second sit early in the afternoon. It really resets and recharges you for the second half of the day. Do I have a special centering prayer space that I use? I guess I shared what they were. In the morning, it's our spare bedroom is where I do my first sit. And then my second sit, my special space, is my car. As I said, it's the front seat of my car when I'm at work. When I'm not at work, my second sit, again, usually is the spare bedroom at our house. But sometimes I'll flex this sit, quite frankly. I've done centering prayer sits in the nice weather outside in my backyard. If I'm at a park and I'm taking a walk and there's a gazebo, I've done second sits in the gazebo in a park. I've done second sits for work. I've had to drive to, or not drive, I have to take the train to New York City. I've done sits on the train. Nobody knows I'm doing a centering prayer sit. They think I'm sleeping. I've done them on airplanes, done them with the family when I'm not driving and my wife's doing the driving. I've done them from the passenger seat of the car, quite frankly. So you can really do a centering prayer sit wherever you want to. What are the fruits of my practice? And that's kind of the exciting part. We enter centering prayer simply because we love God and we want to sit with God. And again, centering prayer is just another way to pray. It's silent, wordless prayer, as I mentioned earlier. By all means, I don't want you to stop other forms of prayer, verbal prayer, singing, chanting, whatever they might be. And I also practice verbal prayer, and I practice what's called the Jesus prayer as well. So don't eliminate your other prayer forms. Centering prayer is kind of a nice form of prayer where we simply get to sit and rest with God. So again, what are the fruits of my practice? I don't enter them for the fruits. I enter centering prayer because I simply want to sit with God, be connected with God, be reconnected with God, be grounded with God, and then get up and walk with God. but God seems to bless you with fruits. And I can only speak for myself and what I've noticed in my life. And I've noticed tremendous confidence. I've noticed an excitement for life that I didn't have before I began practicing centering prayer. I've noticed wisdom for tasks. As I mentioned earlier, often at work, I'm stuck on a task and I don't know how to handle it. I go into my centering prayer sit before lunch, and then after lunch, I seem to have solutions to some of the problems that I had. So centering prayer seems to give me inner wisdom for tasks. Centering prayer also kind of gives me nudges to try and do new things. Talking with you folks live on FaceTime is not something I would have done years ago. So it's given me an inner nudge, an inner push just to talk and share centering prayer with people, quite frankly. It's been so life-giving for me, and I simply want to share it with others that want to learn more. So it's pushed me to get out of my comfort zone, is what centering prayer has done. So these are some of the fruits that I've noticed of my practice, and I think for those that practice centering prayer, and for those that are new to centering prayer, you'll probably notice the same thing, that you're noticing something different about yourself. You're noticing fruits of your practice that are really unique for you. And that's what I really find so transforming about centering prayer. What is my method? What I mean by that is you can use a sacred word, you can use an image, you can use your breath, or you can just stare at a spot to bring yourself back to the present during centering prayer. Because the purpose, again, of centering prayer is really to open to the presence of God and the actions of God within. So we use our sacred word, or we use our breath, or we use our interior image to bring us back to the present when we find ourselves planning the day, thinking thoughts, reminiscing over the past, so that we can let go of them and open to God, who's beyond our thoughts, beyond our emotions, beyond our physical sensations. So my method is a sacred image of a Jesus icon. When I first started practicing centering prayer, I believe I used Jesus, I used the word love, I may have used the word ocean, and I figured out quickly that I really was more of a visual person, so I used an image. So I recommend that what makes the most sense for you is what you use. So if you're an auditory person, you might want to use a word. If you're a visual person, you might want to use an image. If you're kind of more of a physical person, you might want to use your breath. Or my daughter practices centering prayer with me from time to time, and she's worried that she will fall asleep. So she simply does the sacred glance, which is with your eyes open. And I don't think I mentioned that earlier, that generally you close your eyes during centering prayer, but you don't have to. Some people do centering prayer with their eyes open because they're worried that they'll fall asleep. So how does someone begin a centering prayer practice? You begin. It's really as simple as that. You don't plan it, you don't think about it, you make a conscious decision that you want to see what the silence of centering prayer can do for you. So the first thing you have to do is make a decision that I'm going to try centering prayer. I recommend baby steps if you're worried, because I practice up to 20 minutes at a time. If you're worried about that being too long, and in the beginning it was brutal for me, quite frankly, I'll be honest, when I first started practicing silence was brutal. That was actually before I discovered centering prayer. So I used to just practice silence, and it was brutal, and I would practice it for 1 to 3 minutes at a time and be glad it was done and over with. And then I came across centering prayer in Amos Smith's book, Healing the Divide, and began practicing centering prayer. And I don't have an answer as to why, but I just sort of jumped right into the pool, so to speak, and began practicing twice a day on most days for 20 minutes each. But I do recommend take baby steps. Practice 1 to 5 minutes. But do it twice a day. I think it's important to get the second sit. So how do you begin? You make a conscious decision that I'm going to start. You make a conscious decision that I'm going to do this twice a day for 1 to 5 minutes. And I'm going to try it for 1 month. And I'm going to see what happens. That's what I recommend you do. What books and websites do I recommend? We can certainly take a look at my site, Silence Teaches. I have a weekly meditation every Monday. I love to read, so you'll see a lot of book reviews coming across. I love to interview interesting contemplative people and teachers and authors, so you'll see interviews coming off of my site as well. Obviously, I recommend the Contemplative Outreach, which is the main international centering prayer organization. I strongly recommend their website as well to take a look at centering prayer and learn more. In terms of books, the first two books that I read when I began practicing centering prayer were Centering Prayer and Inner Awakening by Cynthia Bourgeault and Open Mind, Open Heart by Thomas Keating. Those were great books to start with for someone new to centering prayer like me. So I would definitely recommend both of those books if you have never read anything on centering prayer. Some people have asked me, what are some other contemplative practices besides centering prayer? Centering prayer is a practice that works for me, but some people will come to me and I will work with them and teach them centering prayer, and we'll together discover that centering prayer isn't the right practice for them. So I find a different practice that will work for them. And I'll just name them. I'm not going to go through what they are, but Christian meditation, the Jesus prayer, prayer labyrinths, Lectio Divina, chanting are all different types of contemplative practices that someone can practice and have really the same fruits from as if you practice centering prayer or really any type of silent or contemplative practice. So as I mentioned, I had someone come to me, we worked together on centering prayer, and we soon discovered that Christian meditation made more sense for her. Christian meditation is slightly different than centering prayer, where you're using more of a mantra, and that was something that really worked better with her and with her personality. So she practices Christian meditation, and another gentleman that I work with actually practices the Jesus prayer. But again, these practices can still be done twice a day for 20 minutes. These practices are still involved opening to the presence and interactions of God within. These practices all have wonderful fruits that are really unique for each practitioner, which is really the most exciting part, is that you sit in faith with God and you see what happens. And each of these practices, if you stick with it, something amazing will happen. These practices, the grace of God produces some wonderful fruits in your life. So these were some of the questions that I received. I wanted to go live and just share the questions that I've received, and I wanted to share my answers to these questions. I'll stick around for another minute or two here to see if there's any other questions anybody else has. Looks like I have some folks that have joined us, so thanks for joining me. Let me know if you have any other questions that I can answer for you before I sign off, and I'm actually going to go see a movie with my wife and kids. In fact, I apologize. I know I had scheduled this for 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, until my wife told me we're going to a movie at 3, so I had to bump it up by 1 hour. So I'll hang tight for another 15 or 20 seconds in case any questions pop up. Okay, well, it doesn't look like there's going to be any questions. So again, thanks for joining me, and I hope to try to do these lives a little bit more often. I think they're fun for me to do. As I get questions, I like to share with the community answers to the questions, many questions I've received. So thanks for joining me, and thanks for joining me on the replay as well.